We don't want any more rain. We want some sunshine. All right, as you think about our society, if we could gauge kind of what we value or what we spend money on, I would have to say that our society has a truly distorted view of greatness. And I use as kind of exhibit one, sports stars. And the obscene amount of money that some of these sports stars are being paid in their contracts. And so I've got the top 5 sports contracts here. And it's interesting to me, they're all baseball players. And I guess you can value them differently. This is not endorsements. This is just salary. So with endorsements, it gets a little skewed. But this is with salary. So there's a tie for 4th place. Albert Pujols has, and I said that wrong, but $240 million over 10 years. And he's tied with Robinson Cano, who also has $240 million over 10 years. And I'm thinking, all right, that's a lot of money. And this is really sad when you have both the 3rd and the 2nd spot. Alex Rodriguez with the Texas Rangers got $252 million over 10 years. But when he signed with the New York Yankees, it was $275 million over 10 years. And then, of course, Miguel Cabrera with the Detroit Tigers, $292 million. Now, that's $292 million to hit a little white ball with a wooden stick. You know, and you're thinking, I know it's hard, but really, $292 million, that's $29 million a year. That's $179,000 per game. That's about $20,000 an inning. You know, you think about that. And that inning, you might not even get up to bat, right? It's like you're not doing anything. So I want you to compare that to the average pay for a firefighter, which is about $40,000, right? So if you think about this, I want you to think about the guy who runs into a burning building and rescues a family from a fiery death. He's going to get about $150 for that day's work. $150 for running into the building and rescuing that family. And at the same time, during that afternoon, there's a guy that's playing baseball and getting $179,000. Something's messed up with that, right? I mean, in terms of our values. But it's a story that can be repeated numerous times. It just seems that we idolize and we glamorize all the wrong things. And it's part of our culture. You know, it's symptomatic of our society where appearance has value over substance and depth. And what else can we use to explain our fascination with celebrities? And it's like, why is it that we care whether a Hollywood star is pregnant again? Or who cares if that mega music star is getting a divorce? But we do. And we tweet about it, and we report about it, and there's pictures about it, and there's articles about it. We live in a society which just reveres fame and fortune, and people are valued or gauged by how many people know who you are and how many people know your name. And where reaching the top and being better than others and more important than others and more glorious than others is the primary goal. And it's not new. I want to forget, this is the same as it was in Jesus' day. And Rome was great because of her legions, because that she had the power to impose her will. And it was why the Jews hated her so much. And I want you to recognize, it wasn't that the Jews had a different value system than the Romans, that they were envious of the Romans. It was because they wanted to be the top dog, and they weren't. And so they were envious because Rome was in control, and they wanted to be in control. They wanted a free Israel that would be not having any control from other people, any enemies, any other nation over them. It was their dream to have, once again, the glory of the days of David, a messianic kingdom, a dream of the Jewish people, and it was also a dream of many who followed Jesus. That's what they were thinking, that there would be this great kingdom. And we saw in Peter's confession back in chapter 8, verse 29, that Peter had come to recognize, as the other disciples, that Jesus was Messiah. And so they had this vision of what that would mean. And there were familiar markers of what Messiah would be. And Jesus, after the confession of Peter, begins to modify that. And he begins to change that and help them understand that Messiah that he was bringing, the idea of Messiah, was one who would be killed and crucified and rejected. And a crucified Christ was not what they expected. And then he also goes on to say that a crucified Christ has these profound implications for those who would follow him. What it would mean for those who are disciples. And so as we look at the Gospel of Mark, what we see is the second half of his Gospel is going to talk a lot about that latter part. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? A Jesus who will be crucified. What does it look like to follow such a one? And so the two halves of Mark can be kind of divided over a question. And the first question that the chapters 1 through 8 are dealing with is, who is this guy Jesus? Who is he? And we get to the answer in chapter 8, he's Messiah. But the second half is all about, well, what kind of Messiah will he be? And so that's what chapters 8 through 16 are going to focus on. And this is a difficult task for Jesus because he's bringing a radically new vision. Something that they didn't expect, something that they didn't understand. And so he's having to change their thinking. And he starts by spelling it out very clearly to them. We saw this back in chapter 8, what it would look like for him and for them. And they didn't understand. But it actually happens in Mark 3 different times. And so Mark is going to record 3 different times that Jesus predicts his passion. And that the disciples don't understand that. And so we're going to deal with the latter two. We've already dealt with the first one. We're going to deal with chapter 9, chapter 10. In each prediction, Jesus is going to say that he's going to be betrayed, that he's going to be handed over, and that he's going to be crucified. And then there's going to be something, I think we're actually a little bit ahead. Go back to the previous slide there. I think, yeah, there you go. In each of the passion predictions, we're going to see Jesus predicting his betrayal. And then there's going to be some kind of story in which the disciples exhibit their lack of knowledge, where they're going to be clueless as to what he just said. And then he's going to say, now, here's what that means for you. So it's a pattern that occurs 3 different times in Mark. And whenever you see repetition like that, the reason for the repetition is because he's trying to get the point across. And so 3 different times the exact same story basically happens over and over again. So you might remember in the first one, after Jesus predicted his passion, Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke him and say, no, Jesus, that's not the way it's going to happen. And then Jesus has to say, carry your cross and all that kind of stuff. We're going to look at those latter 2. So let's look at the next passage. Chapter 9. So after predicting his death a second time, here's what it says. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what are you arguing about on the road? But they kept quiet, because on the way they had been arguing about who was greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and servant of all. And he took a child, whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. So, Jesus is traveling through Galilee once again, and he's talking about his upcoming death. And his disciples don't understand. Not because the words are unfamiliar, not because the grammar is complex, it's just not getting through it because it doesn't meet any of their expectations. And so they have to assume, oh, this must be one of those hidden parables. When he says crucifixion, he means something else. We don't know what he means, but he means something else. So Mark's gospel is known for portraying the disciples in kind of an unflattering position. Oftentimes that they're very, very dense. Let's just say that they weren't the brightest crayons in the box. You know, that there were sharper pencils than them in the first century. But when they arrive at their destination, Jesus starts asking them, okay, what are you guys talking about? And they're kind of like, oh, we probably shouldn't say, because this is a little bit embarrassing. But what they've been discussing was the future kingdom. And they knew how it was going to look, because of course they knew that Jesus was Messiah. He's going to be the leader. He's going to be the king. That's what Messiah means. He's king. But recognize that there's lots of different positions in the kingdom, right? There's got to be, of course, a second in command. And then there's all kinds of administrative roles. And they're trying to figure out which of them is going to take those various roles. And you can almost hear the excitement in their voices along the way as they're thinking, wow, I'm Jesus' favorite. I'm probably going to be like vice king. you know? And so that's what they were talking about. They weren't talking about, what did he mean by when he said he was going to get killed? They didn't talk about that at all. And so Jesus then says to them, in response to this, a couple of paradoxical statements. If anyone wants to be first, he has to be very last of all and the servant of all. He says the greatness in the kingdom, my kingdom, isn't found at the top. You don't look to see who's the highest paid. You don't look to see who is most popular. Where you look is at the very bottom. He says, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And so he takes a child and he points to him as an illustration. Because in that day, unlike our own, children really didn't have any value. Right? Children weren't fawned on like they are in our society. They weren't, held up and idolized. Children were a burden to you until they got old enough to really contribute to the family income. And a lot of them died in youth. So you didn't, you tried not to spend too much money on them or get too attached to them in that way. Not that they didn't love their kids. But children were at the lowest rung of society. They had no status. They had no power. They had no fame. They had no fortune. They had nothing. And so Jesus says, look at this guy. This little child. This nobody. This is greatness in the kingdom. People that you would overlook. He says in the kingdom, the value system of the world is reversed. It's turned on its head. And people that the world does not honor and the people that the world overlooks, those are the people of most value in the kingdom of God. They have no claim, they have no titles, they have no honors, they have no bank accounts, they have no stock holdings. But they're the people that are worth something. And we find a similar message then in the third passion prediction. So here we are, we're on our way to Jerusalem. The end is drawing near. Jesus is headed to his death. And he spells out in even more detail exactly what's going to happen. He says that he'll be spit upon, he's going to be flogged, he's going to be killed. And the disciples are still clueless. In fact, notice what happens next. Immediately after uttering these words, look at chapter 10, verse 35 and following. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do for you? He said. They replied, let one of us sit on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink? Or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? Oh, we can, they answered. And then Jesus said, well, you will drink the cup I drink, and you will be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. But to sit on my right and my left, that's not for me to say. These places belong for those whom they've been prepared. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. And Jesus called them together and he said, you know those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And give his life a ransom for many. And so this is just, imagine this. Jesus has just for the third time spelled out his demise. He knows what's coming. And imagine, walking toward Jerusalem knowing exactly what that's going to look like. And then sharing that very sad story with your friends, your closest companions on this earth. And they immediately turn around, not understanding anything you've just said. And they start kind of saying, well, Jesus, we want you to do something for us. Like, really? You're going to commiserate a little bit with me? No. It's about us, Jesus. It's not about you. It's about us. They're still thinking about a kingdom in worldly terms. And James and John want the choicest spots. And when the other disciples hear it, they're indignant. Not because of the insensitivity of James and John. They don't say, how could you? Did you not just hear what Jesus said? They're like, sad that they didn't think of it first. They're like, wait a minute. Who do you think that you get right and left hand? That's for me. Boy, just imagine Jesus' position here. These are the guys that he's been with. Time is running short and Jesus still can't get it through their head. Now, I often, as a teacher, I take comfort in this. You know, when I've said something for the 100th time to my students and I see the blank stares, I think, Jesus knows exactly what this is like. Because his disciples were just as dense as my students. And if he couldn't get through, then I can't get through. You know, who am I? But Jesus is going to try one more time and calls them together. And again, another teaching lesson. He said, you know about the Gentiles. This is the way the world works. If you're in power, you let everybody know you're in power. Right? And they got to bow down to you, and they have to recognize your authority, and they have to kowtow and all that kind of stuff. That's the way the Gentiles work. From the top down. That's not my kingdom. He says, that's not how it works here. Whoever wishes to be great, it's the servant. Whoever wants to be first, that's the slave. And the reason you're going to do that as followers is because that's what I've done. As your king, as your Lord, as your master, as your Savior. I've done that. And then he uses this illustration. He says, picture this great banquet. And all the world leaders are there. You got the American president there. You got the president of Russia. You got all these dignitaries and officials there. And you're standing in the room and you see everybody's in black ties and everybody's dressed up. And he says, now, I know this is going to be a challenge, but look at that crowd and tell me, who do you think is the greatest in that whole crowd? And you're like, I don't know, man. Of course it's going to be the American president because I'm an American, so it's got to be that one, right? And you're looking all over and you're saying, well, you know, that guy's pretty impressive over there. And then he says, all right, you see that lady over there? And he's pointing to this waitress who's got a pitcher of water in her hand. And every time somebody's drink gets down just a little bit, she goes over and she fills it out. You see that waitress over there? That's the greatest person in this whole room. That one over there. Like, you gotta be crazy, Jesus. That's not how it works. But in his kingdom, that's exactly how it works. You see, greatness in Jesus' kingdom is found in the most unlikely of places. It's found where you never thought you'd find it before. Now, we can go to some illustrations of this in our contemporary world. You think about a lot of stories coming out of World War II especially. There was, of course, during the Nazi campaign, lots of abuses. People treated with contempt and devalued as if they were animals. And there's one story I wanted to highlight. It's a Father Maximilian Kolbe. During the Second World War, this guy had sheltered lots and lots of Jews in his friary, saved over 2,000 Jews by hiding them. Eventually, he himself was arrested and taken to the concentration camps. In 1941, he was transferred to Auschwitz. And in July 1941, while he was at Auschwitz, well, one of the prisoners in the camp vanished. And they don't know exactly what happened. It assumes they escaped. And so the commandant of the camp decided that he would punish his fellow prisoners by taking 10 of those from his group and starving them to death. Now, one of the guys that had been chosen began to cry out and said, I have a wife, I have a child. Please don't do this to me. And Kolbe steps forward. He's not one of the chosen. And the commandant says, well, what do you want, Kolbe? And he says, I'd like to take this man's place. And so the commandant obliged, and he, along with the 9 others, were starved to death. And you think about stories like that, you say, wow, I don't know if I could do that. That's sacrifice kind of beyond measure there. That's like Jesus level sacrifice. And I think those models are important for us, where we see that kind of sacrifice, profound sacrifices like that. But I think that more often for us, the challenge is not those kinds of situations. They don't come along very often. I think the challenge for us is the continuing service that we can offer throughout our lives in small ways to those around us. It's the small acts of service. When we do things that the world thinks aren't significant just because it's the right thing to do. You see, the world rewards us when we do great things, when we do things that it values, and we get rewards for doing those things. So sometimes when we sacrifice for our job, for example, we put in the extra time, we're doing that so that we'll get a higher salary or a better position. But what I'm talking about is when you do things and nobody notices, and nobody knows, and you do it simply because it's the right thing to do. Greatness in the kingdom is found in those who simply do what Christ calls them to. It's found in those who keep their word and their covenants. It's seen in people who live their lives not just for themselves, but who see the needs of others, and they're willing to sacrifice their own comfort and their own resources and their own good so that that person might be blessed. It's found in the most unlikely of places. It's in the mother who continues to serve her children and to cook the meals and to provide for her family, even when the thank yous aren't there, even when people don't recognize, even when perhaps there's contempt on the part of her teenagers. It's in the husband who stays faithful to his wife, even when, let's say, the spark is going out and the wife is distant from him, and he says, but I made a covenant, and I'm going to keep going on with that covenant. It's for the employee who does their job even when they're not getting put forward or rewarded by their boss, and they think that they're on a dead-end track, but they do the job the best that they can because that's what Christ would want them to do. It's the person who's faithful to a friend who's making all the wrong choices, and it's sapping you emotionally, but you're there by their side because they're your friend, and they need you, and they need your help, and they need someone. It's those times when we do what we do because Christ calls us to do it. It's the volunteer in a ministry who just keeps pouring themselves out even when they're not necessarily seeing anything happen, because they know that's what love is. And they're not being appreciated, and they're not being financially rewarded, but Christ has called them to this. Recognizing what Jesus says about the kingdom is recognizing it's not about I, it's not about me, it's not about self. The kingdom is about us, and it's about we. It's about recognizing that God has created a world in which there are people of need all around us. And that we as Christians have an opportunity to be Christ to others and to serve in so many different ways as His servants. I invite the praise team to come up as we close and think about this. That greatness is found in simply being faithful and obedient. Greatness in the kingdom is found in faithfully walking after Jesus' steps, no matter where they might lead. Greatness is found in the small things, in the faithfulness of those who sacrifice each and every day a little bit of themselves so that others might be blessed. Because in that, Christ is made alive to the world. And so it's not about us. It's not about me. It's about God's creation and the kingdom that He envisions for us. May we have that vision of what the kingdom can be. Let's continue to praise.
Oops. Not consuming fire. God of justice. I must have been tired last night when I was editing the PowerPoint. Sorry about that, everyone. Please reflect on the words of this next song. Savior to all.